some of the introducing the workshop, introducing our participants, our speakers, as well as just a few modalities of how we'll go about this workshop. It's the first time, at least, I am conducting something like this in the online format. So I guess we're all still learning. But let me first begin by extending a very warm welcome to everyone. To this workshop, which is titled "Decolonizing Knowledge Production: A Debate on Environmental Politics in Assam." We're really delighted to have the set of speakers that we do, the participants that we have who are joining us from all over, as well as a few of our colleagues who've joined us, who work in these areas. And let me just then begin by very briefly first introducing myself and my colleague Ruyu Lin. Both of us have sort of collaborated together to organize this workshop. So I teach at Development Studies. Hi, Holida. Great.
Hi.
We just started out, so I was just beginning.
Sure.
So I teach Development Studies at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences in IIT Guwahati. I'm based here, and I work on issues of land dispossession and development, as well as working increasingly with ideas of decolonization, which I'll speak about in just a moment when I speak about the workshop. Ruyu Lin is doing her PhD at the Institute of Development Studies in Sussex, in England, and she's working on experiences and emotions around climate change, the way in which indigenous communities experience and respond to and react to and live with climate change in the context of communities in Arunachal Pradesh and in Himachal Pradesh. So we sort of came together while we were having conversations while Ruyu was in Guwahati and then moving to Arunachal for her field work. Just to speak a little bit about the workshop and what the idea of the workshop was, or is that first of all, it's not a workshop that's simply on environment, but that's a debate that's discussing environmental politics. And so we want to discuss the environment not in isolation, not nature simply as nature that exists in and of itself or in some sort of an abstraction, but which is embedded within relations of power, which is embedded within political economy, which is constantly shaped by the material questions of how do people live and survive and subsist. And that means that the agrarian communities, people who cultivate land, will shape the landscape in a certain way, will shape land in a certain way, will shape the ecology in a certain way, and while urban communities will shape the idea of forests. So you may have a forest or a jungle in certain spaces, and then you have gardens and lawns in other spaces, and these are different ways in which ideas of nature and environment are shaped through our material processes of how we reproduce ourselves as a people, the kind of labor we do. And so even agrarian landscapes, for example, don't all look the same. The way in which agriculture is organized, agricultural activity is organized, changes the way spaces are shaped, and the environment and land and ecology is shaped, which is why while all of these parts might be agrarian, the hills of Nagaland will look very different from the Brahmaputra Valley, which looks very different from the Indo-Gangetic plains of Punjab and Haryana, which look different from the way in which cultivation shapes land and space in Jharkhand, for example, or on coastal areas in Kerala, for example. And so we don't think of environment as just simply something that is there, but is something that is very much rooted in laboring and engaging and interacting with the environment in order to reproduce ourselves, and the choices we make in the forms of labor that we engage in also then continuously shape the environment. And so we also want to then think about and talk about the environment very much in this sort of a rooted context, where it is embedded in resource politics, in who has access to what kinds of resources, how are those resources then distributed. Um, so those are the kinds of questions that that we want to be looking at in this workshop. And then at the same time, neither is the workshop merely on environmental politics then alone, but it's also very much on decolonization. And when we applied for this grant, we mentioned to the funders that this is an experiment that we're doing, right? It's something that's we see it's something that is fluid in motion. It's not set. It's an experiment, that it's a collective experiment that we're all going to engage in over the next 2 days. Um, and I know that decolonization is an intellectual fad. It's in fashion right now in the academia. So I do want to speak a little bit about what we understand by it and ground it in certain issues, so that we set ourselves apart maybe from a little bit of the fad. um, and so there's a very fundamental way in which the academia, university spaces where theories are built and made. The academia has always been built on a separation between those who produce knowledge, who do the work of making theories, producing theories, writing books, being the intellectuals in a society, and those about whom that knowledge is produced. Right? The people about whom academics write are always seem to be different from those who are doing the writing. So it seems to be a different section of society which theorizes, which it intellectualizes, and a different section of society about whom the theories are being made. And this separation has always has been very fundamental to the structure of academia and academic knowledge production. And we think that decolonization is something that begins to challenge that separation, that begins to try to think about how we can build knowledge alongside, walking alongside in dialogue and conversation with the communities with which we work. So we don't study, we don't go into a field to study people, but we work along with people in dialogue with them and strive to build knowledge and build theories and build ideas and understandings and analysis in conversation with them collectively and collaboratively. Right? That's something that at a very basic level is something that from our framework of decolonization we understand as central. A form of knowledge production that is, at the end of it, in principle, committed to the broader project of social transformation. So, not producing knowledge for the sake of knowledge, but thinking about questions of, what kind of societies we want to build, and to have those to build those ideas in conversation with people with whom we work. And this would then mean that it changes, and it should change, that once we change our orientation around this, that it should change the way we think about the field, the way we think about respondents, right? How do we enter the field, what is data, how do we what is it is often called that academia is also an extractivist industry because it also extracts data from people. Right? So how do we think of data collection? How do we think of then analyzing that data? What are the terms and concepts and frameworks that we use to analyze data? How much does what the conversations that one has in the field influence the way we analyze data? How do we then build theory? What is the language in which we write? And by language, I don't simply mean the medium of writing, which is, whether it's English or Assamese or something else, but also the politics of the kinds of words and the kinds of language that we use. How accessible is that language? How far and wide does that language actually? Is it intelligible and accessible for people to read and understand? And then how is finally what we write, how is it disseminated? So it makes us think about all of these questions. I also understand that these are not all questions that we can necessarily address, or when anyway not looking to resolve them. They are questions that we have to constantly go on engaging within the field and building on, again, very much collectively and collaboratively. Um, but this is the broader framework, and we see this therefore as an experiment, but also as a beginning of a longer process of conversations that we hope to continue. It could be in different forms, in different kinds of spaces, and we really do hope that our future conversations will happen in person. We would, just before we began, Uttam was also speaking to my colleague Kipgin about how we're tired of this online system, and we've learned to adapt now. We've all learned how to use these things at a time when it started, and teaching online was an absurd idea, to now having but there's also certain advantage in this, in that we are able to sometimes now reach out to a larger number of people, which otherwise would not have been possible in an offline format, for want of resources, um, for various reasons. So while taking advantage of this, but we also do, it's always, there's a certain kind of dialogue, a momentum, a dynamic, as well as relationships that are built when we sit together, talk together, debate and discuss together. So we hope that in the future we will be able to get back to that form, and be able to talk about all of these. And so we see this as as a sort of a beginning. And with that, I'd like to sort of introduce our speakers. um, we're very, very excited to have the set of speakers that we do, and we're really looking forward to the next 2 days. I also have to add that we received a critique that why is your panel and speakers full of men, and we take that critique, and it's something that we need to think about, that we need as we move forward in this. um, but anyway, despite that, we are delighted to have the set of speakers that we do. The schedule, everyone has already received the schedule, so I won't sort of bother going through that. We have with us today, in the first session that we're going to have on autonomy and environment, we have Holiram, Terang, and Uttam Bhattari with us. I'll just sort of briefly introduce them, and also, very much within the framework of of the idea of the workshop. Their introductions also fit well within what our idea of what we're going to try to do in the next 2 days. Holiranda, he began his political engagement sort of rooted within the context of movements that were looking at, from his location within what now is called Karbi Anglong, around issues of tribal autonomy, amongst both the Karbi Hills Autonomous District, Karbi Anglong Autonomous District, and now what is called the Dima Hasao Autonomous District Councils, the North Kachar Hills and the Karbi Hills, that broad region, and was part of a very important process of politicizing, of a kind of a radical politics in the 80s and the 90s, where he headed then what the formation that came, demand committee, autonomous state for these regions, also very much with the idea of protecting and safeguarding, and ensuring and guaranteeing tribal rights and autonomy over their land, over their resources. He has been autonomous state demand committee, also subsequently then became a political formation and fought elections. He's been a 3-time MLA and has been a former minister as well, in the Assam government, and continues to remain engaged. He's an extremely important progressive voice within Assam, that has been raising questions around, precisely around these questions of what autonomy, why autonomy is important, why questions of autonomy are important when we think about our basic resources such as land, the environment, the way in which people have, the medium through which rights are ascertained, right? Rights of people to their land, a certain sovereign right to their land, remains safeguarded and remains protected, and is guaranteed. And so he's been a very important figure within Assam in that entire process. And the struggle goes on. It's not something that that is in the past. Um, Along with him, who will be speaking in the session on autonomy and environment, is Uttam Bhattari. And Uttam is a historian by training. He's currently based at Guwahati University in the history department. He was earlier with the Indian Council of Historical Research. Uttam has also been working in a similar area, and it's we're looking forward to hearing Holida and Uttam speak. So he has been working in Dima Hasao and has been working with communities around oral histories, around questions of looking at the relationship between questions of culture, identity, resources, land, which, as I said at the beginning, are all, we see them and understand them as very much interrelated with one another. We don't see culture as simply song and dance, or forms of dresses, but we see them very much as linked to the access to land, the right to land, a degree of autonomy, and several of these material questions. His research work, his doctoral work, was in fact on rice cultivation, and through engaging with the oral history method, also attempted to bust this myth that the kind of development in agriculture and forms and techniques of agriculture was simply something that came from the Indo-Gangetic plains, as was diffused in this region but emerged from there, but that in fact there was an autonomous and independent process that was going on in these areas, and through the oral history method tried to sort of revive and recover some of this history of an independent dynamic around agriculture and agrarian processes that went on here. He currently continues to remain engaged with the focusing also a lot on the youth, and was part of forming something called Yadam, which is the Youth Association for Development and Empowerment. And maybe he will speak a bit more about some of these processes and his engagement with the communities that he's been engaged in for a while, and the way in which, while engaging with these questions, how do questions of environment and resources interact and are linked with questions of culture and identity, for instance. So we have these two speakers today. We also have with us tomorrow for our session Niranta, Gohain, and Pranab Doley. Niranta, they will be speaking on conservation, capitalism, and rights. Niranta is based out of the area of Dibru Saikhwa National Park, and he's been working for 2 decades on questions of environment and nature, and once again of the kind of distribution and access to it. I'm sure he'll tell us more about it, but he likes to remind all of us that before he began to work on this, he was himself engaged in logging and engaged in poaching within the national park, but sort of came away from that and works now on questions of conservation. Has also been engaged with then also evolving and developing community ways of creating sustainable development and livelihood opportunities, and has actually established a wide network around ecotourism. Has was a key individual in actually establishing ecotourism as a community initiative, which was a way of creating livelihood opportunities in a sustainable way that also was in tandem with the environment. And interestingly, I don't know, I could be wrong, but if I'm not wrong, he was never arrested while he was engaged in timber logging or poaching. But when he began to work on questions of raising questions of conservation, raising questions of resource politics and impacts of different kinds of extractive industries that was destroying the ecology and environment, he has been jailed. So this is also sort of telling about the broader institutional structures within which, for example, the state engages with questions of nature and environment. It tells us how the state thinks about questions of environment and nature, who should speak about it, who can protect it and conserve it. And alongside Niranta, then we have Pranab Doley, who who's from Kaziranga, which is another, very important. It's seen as one of the most important and the most attractive sites, tourist sites of Assam, which has a huge tourist footfall, is very very popular. Everyone wants to go and visit Kaziranga and see the rhino and the tiger. But we then hear from Pranab about what has been the history of his engagement. He's from there, like I said, was founded an organization, a mass-based organization called Jipal Krishak Shramik Sangh, which has been working with the communities to raise questions of human rights violations, to raise questions once again of people's right and access to resources, to raise questions of militarization. Kaziranga is one of amongst India's most militarized national parks. So, what are these models of conservation that once again the state puts in place in order to govern nature? Right? What are the rules of law that the state puts in place in order to control and govern and shape nature once again, which is very different from which is very different from a community forest. Kaziranga looks and is monitored very differently. It has boundaries, it has gates, it has there are weapons, there are night vision goggles. The landscape itself is shaped very differently, and so we'll hear from Pranab about that kind of context. He also fought the elections and also decided to engage in the political process. He fought the Assam state elections last year, and it was the first time that they entered the political fray, and won about 30,000 votes and were the primary opposition there. So these are the different ways in which they've also attempted to engage and raise the question of uh, of autonomy. It's a very fundamental question of autonomy at the end of the day, and of rights of people, and to raise to speak about people's voices around these questions of environment and nature. So these are our four speakers. We didn't try to pack in too many sessions, too many speakers, and so we hope that we're not going to have a very rushed process, and that we have enough time to be able to debate and dialogue and talk at length about many of these questions that I'm sure that the speakers are going to raise over the next 2 days. So once again, a very warm welcome to everyone. I think with this we can begin our first session. I'm going to hand it over. My colleague Dr. Kipgin is going to be moderating this session. So I'm going to hand it over to Kipgin. Kipgin, I think the order is that we'll have Holiram Das speak first, and then Uttam, and we have time from 3 to 4 for them to speak. Then we have a short break, and then we have the discussion session.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So I'll take over from here, and I am delighted to be part of this workshop. And we have today two speakers for this session: Holiram, Terang, and my friend Uttam Bhattari. So we'll begin with Holiram, Terang, and I think it's a 1 hour span. So maybe they will split into 30 minutes each, and then we have a 15 minutes break in between, and which will be followed by Q&A session. So I would like to welcome Holiram Terang to go on. So the floor is yours. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I think, first thank. Am I audible? Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You are audible.
I should first thank DSA and IIT Guwahati for organizing this workshop. And I think it's time that we devote our knowledge and energy, uh, especially our intellectual energy, towards this. Now, as per the issue of decolonizing knowledge production, especially on the environmental politics. First of all, I would like to speak in the context of Karbi Anglong. Karbi Anglong, or you can say Karbi people. Say politically, the Karbis doesn't have that written history and all that. So we can deduce it from oral history and some form of written history. I can say that historically, Karbis were never under any ruler, except for some area and for some time. It was only the British, actually. I mean, before the British, it was Ahom, then there was Khasi, then there was Dimasa, and all that. But the Karbis were never under any of them. It was the British who came and colonized the whole area, and they administered the areas in some ways or the other. Then, towards the last part of the colonial rule, there were some Government of India acts and all that, and these areas, along with the areas in other places, were brought under the excluded and partially excluded areas. Then when the time came for independence, then the Constituent Assembly wanted these areas to be studied. They formed a subcommittee for this area, and it was called the Borderline Subcommittee. And the Borderline Subcommittee went around, and I think they talked with different people, they talked with some representatives and all that. And ultimately, they submitted a recommendation which we are incorporated in the Constitution of India as 6 scheduled areas. So under the 6th schedule, right now, in Assam, Karbi Anglong and Dima Hasao are administered. Then later, much later, the border area came in under 6th schedule. Then there are 6 scheduled areas in Meghalaya and Mizoram and also in Tripura. Now in Karbi Anglong, before that also during the Constituent Assembly, the Borderline Committee went around in different places. But what I can say is that they might have met some representatives of different tribes and communities, but the traditional system of governing the area or administering the area by the traditional heads, customary heads, we are not or are not incorporated in the 6th schedule. So the 6th schedule is totally a colonial concept. I'm not necessarily it is a modern concept, but totally a colonial concept. And seemingly it gives some kind of an autonomy to the people there, to the Karbis and the Dimasas, or in some other areas also. But these are actually the concept of 6th schedule, the concept of governance of the country is totally alien to the native people, totally alien to the indigenous people. This I can say. And after this, what I would like to say is that, so that means when the boundaries were made, boundaries of districts and, the system of governance, so the traditional knowledge, the traditional system and traditional boundaries were not taken into account. This I can say. Now, after that, many might have thought that since autonomy has been granted to the tribes at that time, to the Khasis, the Jaintias, the Garos, the Mizos, the Nagas, the Karbis, the Dimasas, and all that, so they would be happy. But it was not so. Immediately after the independence, immediately after the constitution was adopted, many different people, many different tribes, they came together and they started showing their dissatisfaction about this kind of autonomy. So different kind of demands for self-determination were there, and I think that even the demand for sovereignty was there. Even when the demand for sovereignty was there, and this demand was from almost all communities, at least in the northeast. I can't say about the areas in other places in the northeast. This kind of demand for self-determination was there. Now, when we think about, when we want to talk about, this is the institutional form that has taken, after the sexuality was introduced, and the nature of politics that that brings in is naturally uh, uh, naturally the nature of politics is there. It stems from, it emerges from the urge for self-rule, the aspiration for self-rule. So that is the uh, thing that spars the politics of the area, Karbi Anglong, Limassau, and maybe in other places also. Then, and the kind of politics, the method, or the, you can say, the form of politics undertaken is basically is a mass form, basically a mass form, and kind of a mass movement. Even in Meghalaya also it was like that. In Karbi Anglong, Dimasa also it was like that. But naturally, the mass form is not as we understand it, and that also took electoral form. That means uh, the people who wanted to have their demands met, they fought elections on those issues, on the issue of self-determination. Self-determination in different forms. And many of them won, and many also lost. So the nature of policy was like that. And then question of the question is basically being raised in these areas is naturally is the right of a people. The political questions that's being raised is the question of the right of a people, the right of a community, the right of a tribe, the right of a community, the right of a tribe to live in its own wisdom and to govern or administer or rule its own territory by themselves. So that is the questions basically raised. Now, as the question of preserving, question of conservation, protection of nature, and all that, every community wants to preserve nature. Every community wants to keep the area protected and wants to govern and control the resources in its own way. Because the total livelihood of the community depends on nature only. Starting from day-to-day activities, like when the people want, the first thing that comes to our mind is, for a person, for a people in a day's life, is eat food. That is food. Basically, the staple food is naturally rice, and rice is cultivated there in nature. And is in the hill areas, it is a slash and burn cultivation, and that comes from nature. So they would like to protect that particular area. Then comes, say, vegetables, we can say, and vegetables. Our people generally do not grow vegetable in their own garden because there are plenty of vegetables available in nature. Just go out of home, go to the jungle, and you can pick any kind of vegetable that you want. As for meat, also the same thing. You want fish, go to the river, fish it. You want meat, go to the forest, and you hunt for maybe a deer or a fowl or whatever, or maybe a jungle boar. So even for food, day-to-day food, the people are dependent on nature. So nature, they would like to conserve it, they would like to protect it. And as for the building houses, starting from the post of the house and the thatches and all that, and all other materials are easily normally available in the jungle, be it bamboo, be it timber, be it thatch, whatever. So all these are available in the jungle, and naturally, the people do not cultivate timber or trees, or do not cultivate thatch. They don't have to, because it's available in the nature. So they want nature to be like that, to grow in its own way. Even for clothing also, even for clothing, the clothes that people wear, whether it be for the women or whether it be for men, they make their own yarns, and it comes from it comes from those insects. It comes from those insects where the yarn is there, and it comes from those cotton which are grown in the jungle. Sometimes they cultivate also. So from the cotton or whatever silk yarn, all that, those are uh, taken from nature only. So for clothing also, the people are dependent on nature. So if nature is not there, then people cannot have their own clothes. That's one. And besides clothing and besides food, even for medicine, even suppose some person is having some problem, having some problem uh, having some health problems and all that, then people know that what kind of medicine is to be taken. Medicine not necessarily not of pills or those things, but herbs, or maybe some concoction of some herbs and all that. Those are taken, and as we know that for injuries and all that, naturally herbs are being pasted and put on, and people live on like that. So the people depend on nature for construction, for food, for clothing, for medicines, etc. So naturally, the Kardis and other tribes want nature to be preserved, want nature to be protected, and want to administer the area in its own way, so that the livelihood of the people are protected. As for sustainability, I think uh, the question of sustainability comes only when the modern way of living comes in. Because before this, we can say the modern or the Western way of living has come in. There was hundreds of years, centuries, where people uh, live in its own way, live in its own wisdom, and conserve nature in its own. After the modern way of living has come up, then the question has come, you know, uh, to get many things out of nature for personal gain, for profits, for other activities, all that. So naturally, the question of sustainability has come, because there is a threat to these things. There is a threat to nature and all that. Now, since we cannot go away of these modern techniques or modern way of living, so naturally the forest or nature has to be conserved in a sustainable manner. Sorry. So this can be done. This can very much be done with modern knowledge and by incorporating the traditional wisdom. By incorporating the traditional wisdom of how to sustain environment, how to sustain ecology, the centuries old wisdom, the centuries old traditional knowledge of different tribes can very much be incorporated into the modern knowledge system, and we can then we can think about sustainability. Now there is an issue about autonomy and self-determination. As I have said, uh, almost every community or tribe in Northeast India, which includes Karbis and Dimasas also, is for self-determination. It's a political issue, the political issue of self-determination, the political issue of autonomy. And that stems from the urge for having our own life in our own way. So all these issues, political issues, comes up from that only. And for the last so many decades, in many areas, there is demand for self-rule, self-determination, or autonomy has come up, and there are political battles on it. Political battles in a mass form, mass political battle, and also a political battle in the electoral arena. Now, many of the political leaders have come up, have become known, have become famous, mostly through these political battles of on the issue of autonomy, on the issue of self-determination. And therefore, political formations of different kinds, of different names are there in the Northeast, in Karbi Anglong also, in the Mahasam also. And they are based on the issue of self-determination or autonomy. But a time comes when they cannot sustain their political battle in their own way, in their own name. And our political system in the country is such that the small communities have to be dependent on the bigger communities. Small administrative setups have to be dependent on the bigger setups. That is, autonomous councils are dependent on the state government. State government are dependent on the national union government. So ultimately, these political formations are gobbled up by the national political parties. This is what has happened in Karbi Anglong, this is what happened in Dimashao, in other places also. But still then, there are still political formations which are independent of these national parties and which are fighting for autonomy. So these are the basic issues that I would like to say. Now, lastly, I would like to say is that I think Northeast India is very rich in natural resources. And what I find is that Karbi Anglong mainly is very, very, very rich in mineral sources. You find coal here, you find oil here, uranium is found here, even platinum has been found. So besides the other forest products like sand and maybe bamboo, timber, trees, and all that. So oil, uranium, platinum, coal are found here. And all these big corporates are eyeing on Karbi Anglong. I think many of you know that there's a lot of limestone in Karbi Anglong and Dimahasao. And many cement factories have come up in Dimahasao. Some the Bukajan cement factory is very old, depending on the limestone found in the area here. So ultimately, what happens is that these mines, these minerals are extracted for the profit of the corporates, be it the government corporation or be it the private corporation. They are mined, and ultimately, the natural forests are destroyed. This is what is happening, what has been happening in Meghalaya, in the Khasi Hills for coal mining and all that, for uranium. And here in Karbi Anglong, Dimahasao also is happening. It has affected the people very much, and it has polluted the environment very much, creating lots of problems. This is one. The other is that these are the two districts, especially Karbi Anglong, which are rich in water resource. We have this Langpi River, we have the Kopili River, we have the Kolong River and all that. And hydroelectric projects have come up on this. We know about this Umrongso's hydroelectric project on Kopili River. And I think two more projects are coming up there. And we know about the Karbi Langpi hydroelectric project in Terang, so it's in West Karbi Anglong. And what has done to the people? One is that it looks like, first of all, when there was an MOU between the power generating, power producing company and the autonomous councils, there were agreements that so much of power will be given to the local people. But it is not done at all. This is number one. And number two is so many of the people will be employed in those power projects. It is not done at all. And the next is, they'll get benefits, compensations for the land taken from them, and that has not been done. I do have proof about it, but it's not been done. Then more than that, the impact on the ecology. The impact on ecology is such that I can say about this Karbilang hydroelectric project, which is near Bathari, so it's called Terang. Langpi, the name of Langpi means big river, big water or big river, you can say. It's a river, it's been since time immemorial. It is in the memories of the people. And there is one particular activity which is being done on the river. As many people know that many communities do have this community fishing. Now, after the dam came up in the Karbilang project, though there are community fishing is organized once in a year also, but the number of fish or the quantity of fish has been decreased a lot. And not only that, many from the plains areas like Nagaon, Murigaon, and other places who know that during the rainy season, during monsoon, the dam they open up and the water is open and it goes down to the valley areas and it floods. The flood makes a lot of havoc in those areas. So these are the few things that I would like to say right now. And maybe after this, if there are some other issues, I can speak on that. But right now, I think I'll conclude with this only. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. Yeah. So we move on to the second speaker. I now invite Dr. Uttam Bhattari. And once both of them are done, maybe I'll try to summarize whatever they have, deliberate upon, and move on to the Q&A session after the tea break. So now over to you, Dr. Uttam.
Hi there. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Good. Great. Thank you, Dr. Kigben. I should also convey my thanks to DSA and IIT Guwahati for inviting me to this very interesting session on decolonizing knowledge production, a dialogue on environmental politics. When I was contacted by Dr. Vasundhara, I told her that I'm not an environmental historian or neither an environmental activist. What do you think I should speak there? Then I said that maybe there are some other people who can speak better on this. But then since I couldn't say no finally, so I'm here. I also didn't want to say no because there is another reason is my previous speaker, Holiram Terang. We all call him Holida. It is actually a privilege to be in the same session, same panel with him, because Vasundhara has already introduced him. He is kind of persons like who, one of the pioneers of autonomy movement in the hills of Assam. He was the leader of Autonomous State Demand Committee. He served he was 3 times MLA, Legislative Assembly. Apart from that, he's been active in various other social, movements and so on and so forth, and very progressive voice, like Vasundhara said about him. So it was indeed a privilege to be part of this panel along with him. So I finally had to accept it. Now, I must say that the panel, the topic that is given to us, autonomy and environment, I think it has been done very uh, athlete, because when we talk about autonomy in political discourse today, at least in the politics of Assam or in the region, or when it comes to autonomy, question of autonomy, self-rule for the smaller ethnic communities, we either talk about sixth schedule or the fifth schedule. So, sixth schedule has somehow taken the center stage when it comes to the question of self-rule uh, or autonomous regime. But as we have heard already from Holida, that this whole sixth schedule and the power that is, given to the people through this constitutional arrangement called sixth schedule is not actually adequate, that we have heard from him. In 1952, when first autonomous councils were created both in Karbi Anglong, then North Kachar Hills, then Khasi Jaintia Garo Hills, and Mizo Lusha Hills, within 2 years, the chief executive members of these councils, they gathered in Shillong and they said that this autonomy that is given to us actually uh, uh, not really empowering one. That's why I think Holida also said that it is seemingly autonomous, but it is actually not autonomous. So when we talk about decolonizing knowledge production, I think this is one of the things we should start doing with that. This whole concept of autonomy that is seen to be, given to these people or these communities is not actually autonomous. Now, Holida has already mentioned it, but I would like to just, uh, bring on a few points into it. Uh, Autonomous Council under this schedule were originally given certain departments like primary education, animal husbandry, land regulations. This kind of departments were given to the Autonomous Council, these district councils. These are known as inherent subjects because it was originally, given by the Constitution itself. But later on, with the subsequent political movement, particularly movement for the hill state that came up in the 60s. And we know in 1971, the whole state reorganization took place in Assam, and that's how Meghalaya, state of Meghalaya was created. Karbi Anglong and North Kachar Hills, these two districts were given option whether to remain with Assam or to be part of Meghalaya. Now, both these districts, they decided to stay back with the Assam, and as a result of that, a new district of North Kachar Hills was created. Otherwise, earlier it was United Mikir Hills and North Kachar Hills district. But autonomous, there were two councils, district councils. Now in 71, these two districts were created, and apart from that, more developmental departments were brought under the purview of the district council. But that was even, it was not enough to, exercise control over the land and resources as it is supposed to be under autonomous regime. That's how this whole idea of autonomous state was, it came up, and how this whole movement was led by Holida and his colleagues. But in 1995, again, there was a tripartite kind of agreement signed between Government of India, then Government of Assam, uh, KSA, Karbi Students Association, Dimasa Students Union, and Autonomous State Demand Committee. So that is called Memorandum of Understanding. And as a result of this Memorandum Understanding, more developmental departments were transferred under the purview of the Autonomous Council. But still, in spite of that, there are certain departments, certain subjects which are supposed to be under the Autonomous Council, uh, they are not. Particularly when we talk about environment, uh, the first and foremost thing that comes to our mind is forest. Forest is not a subject under Autonomous Council. Only the unclassified forest is subject to or under the regulation of Autonomous Council. Reserve forests are not part of the Autonomous Council. That is a state subject. Now, such an important department, which plays very crucial role in in uh, in in sense of environment and ecology. That department is not within the purview of autonomous council. So whatever power is given to the autonomous council in terms of regulation of land, that is only limited to unclassified forests and other uh, cultivable land that belongs to the community. So forest is not within the purview of the autonomous council, and that is why I say this whole idea of autonomy that we conceive today has been given to these communities by means of sixth schedule and autonomous council. That is actually not the reality. So that idea itself, in my view, that idea needs to be decolonized first. That these autonomous councils are very autonomous. They are not. They are completely dependent on the state government when it comes to the regulation of reserve forest. Now, another point, Holida has mentioned that both this Karbi Anglong and the Mahasau district is very rich in mineral resources. In terms of uh, uses of these resources, the autonomous councils of these two districts, or maybe even in Meghalaya, they act not more than municipalities. For example, if you are in Guwahati or a city like Guwahati, if you have to construct a land, construct a house in a land, you have to get permission from the municipal corporation. It's just like that only. If anybody wants to carry out mining activities in this region, all they have to do is get a trade license. That is all. That is the only power of the autonomous council, to issue trade license. Everything, right from mining, transporting, their bidding of those mines, everything is done by the state government. So autonomous councils have no role in this entire exercise except for giving trade license. So this is how this whole question of autonomy has been reduced to. It's like it's just like you're like a chokidar. That's all. Rest is everything is done by the state government or the center. Even in terms of land, uh, any rule that is made framed by the autonomous council in regard to land, that can be that becomes null and void if it is in contradiction to any national laws. That and for that reason, if autonomous council cannot say that no, we do not want any mining activities in our area. They cannot say that, because their power is simply overruled by this the power of the national government. So that is what the whole problem of the autonomy that we talk about in the autonomous councils today. Now, another important thing that needs decolonizing is this whole idea of the self-rule and autonomy that has been envisaged under this sixth schedule. Holida has already told that it was the Borderline committee that was instrumental in the formation of sixth schedule. Of course, it has a long colonial history, like excluded and partially excluded areas under the government of India Act 1935, backward tracts, government of India Act 1919, even prior to that Regulation 10 that goes as far back as 1822. So it is from this Regulation 10 we have been we today come across this autonomous regime that we have today. But this entire exercise of the concept of self-rule that finds expression in sixth schedule is problematic, and that has been told by someone like B.K. Roy Borman, the anthropologist, famous anthropologist B.K. Roy Borman. He said that in the framing of autonomous sixth schedule, there are two processes involved. One is the legal process, the other is community process. And he says that unfortunately, the legal processes are given more precedence than over the community processes. And that is the reason why we today, even though in the spirit the sixth schedule is supposed to be a kind of form or a system that kinds of develop synergy with the local culture, local tradition. That is not happening, because this whole idea of rule as envisaged in the sixth schedule itself is very, very alien to uh, traditional people or the people of Karbi Anglong or the Mahasau. That fact has already been said by Holida. Now, the entire developmental question that we talk about today, uh, where the sixth schedule actually says that let these people develop uh, with in their own unique way by tapping their cultural capital. That is not happening, because uh, this whole administrative system is, it is based on larger kind of understanding about larger understanding about administration of resources, etc., etc. So it is connected with the larger knowledge production system. Until and unless that knowledge system is decolonized, that knowledge system is not removed, this is going to continue. For example, let me tell you, uh, uh, if we look at the zooming practice, the larger understanding about zooming is that it is detrimental to the uh, environment, because it kind of leads to deforestation and so on and so forth. But there has been studies across the world, particularly in Latin America, even in Southeast Asia also, where the studies have shown that uh, zooming slash and burn method is not as detrimental to environment and forest the way people look at it. So this kind of false understanding about the practice, traditional practice, has to go, and that is where the role of academia is very important. I feel when I was in ICHR in previous organization, I had the privilege of going through certain documentation process in the state archive, and one of those files were on the agriculture file, wherein I have seen that I have noticed that this colonial administration was very quick on picking up something that is being traditionally used, because they see that this is very, very constructive or productive. So they pick up and they incorporate the same thing in the action of the colonial government actually was helpful in uh, having control over these territories. But that same kind of attitude today we cannot display, because we are not empowered enough in the Autonomous Council to do that. So because of this faulty understanding on the entire agricultural practice in the hills, which is supposed to be more sustainable than anything else, because this kind of agriculture is not monocropping the way it is done in the plains. Zooming is basically multi-cropping. Different kinds of crops are grown in a single space, like with rice, maize, chili, eggplant, then different kinds of gourds, things like that. So this multi-cropping practice is more, beneficial for the health of the soil than the monocropping, monocultural system in the plain. So this, because of this faulty understanding of the Zoom, what we see is that kind of project that came up, IZDP, Integrated Zumia Development Project. Holida, I'm sure he knows about it. This project was, introduced here both in the districts of Karbi Anglong and North Kachar Hills. In place of traditional farming, the farmers, the peasants or farmers were um, encouraged to take into plantation crops like rubber or coffee. But we all know that gestation period of coffee and rubber is quite long. When that project was mooted, that project did not include what would an ordinary farmer in the village would do for 7 years while farming rubber. And also with this whole project, the market system of marketing the rubber or the end product itself was not put in place properly. And also, even if it was put in place properly, it was not uh, within the purview of understanding of ordinary hillmen to understand these complex marketing processes. And at the result, what we see the destruction of natural landscape for monocropping of rubber and coffee, etc. So this kind of faulty understanding actually kinds of brings in a lot of adverse impact on environment in the hills, and I'm sure that also happens in many other areas. Now, we all know across the world today people are talking about sustainability, and when we talk about sustainability, when we talk about environment, naturally the indigenous knowledge system comes in. But these indigenous knowledge systems are gradually wiped out across the world. It is the monopoly of Western modern scientific thinking which has made everything irrational and unscientific. This understanding has to go. I would like to just give you one small example and end my presentation here. We definitely, there will be question and answers. I think we can continue discussing that. One thing that I want to share with you is that in the Masa, the forest is called Hagra. Hagra, if we translate it in English, it is land that's elderly to us, or our elderly land. So that kind of reverence, that kind of mutuality, that this land was already there before we came. That is why it is elderly. And it is this elderly land that supplies everything to us, right from land for cultivation, right from building materials, for hunting, for for protein supplementation by hunting. So this respect, this reverence, and this mutuality or relationality is very, very present in the traditional societies, and that needs to be brought back to the center. When we talk about environment and environmental politics, this is very, very important. Without that, we are going nowhere, because this whole system of resource use has to change and has to go. And for that, our understanding about this traditional lifestyles, traditional culture also has to change, and this decolonization is a must. So I would end here, and we will carry forward further in the process of discussion. Thank you.
All right. Holida and Dr. Uttam, uh, thank you so much. And I'm sure even the participants would have a very, fruitful time. So what we do now is, before moving on to the Q&A session, uh, Vasundhara, should we be having a tea break, or is it not necessary because it's online?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can sort of carry on with the discussion for now. If
Yeah,
it feels like it's getting too much at a point, we can always break for 5 minutes, maybe in between.
yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
because we are also pretty much well advanced in time. Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
before opening up for, so the Q&A session will be taken care of by Lynn, or should I be the one?
You can carry on.
Okay, right.
We
So
I
what I
just want
do, sorry.
Sorry, I just forgot at the beginning. I was supposed to also just make this clarification around the Q&A, that you can, of course, Kipkin has already said that you can put the questions in the chat, but you can also ask questions, unmute yourself and ask questions. You can ask
Hmm.
questions, of course, in English. You can also ask questions in Hindi or in Assamese if you like, and we'll do the translation of that. So yeah, so you can feel free to speak
Hmm.
in.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you please keep in mind, and before opening up for the Q&A session, I think I'll just quickly summarize both the speakers what they have deliberate upon. Uh, Holiram Terang open up with discussing about the notion of self-determination, and which fits in very well with the theme which we have engaged upon today, autonomy and environment. So many of us, when we talk about environmental movement or maybe the political movement, we often tends to uh, see environment in isolation, and which of course is plays very much important plays and roles in terms of fighting for the rights of people, safeguarding the notions of their relationship with land resources, so and so forth. So what Holiram has dwelt upon is by trying to look into the aspirations for self rule, and he has also, since he has a grassroots knowledge and engagement and experience about the movement or method, he says that they are also a form of the method, usually is a mass form, and which of course also transform into an electoral form in the form of electing their own representative. And some of the political questions which usually being raised uh, concerns to the rights of people or community in terms of the uh, autonomy, to claims of autonomy to live or govern in their own wisdom, that is the manner in which how human nature interactions or relationship has been there for generations. And he also pointed out or raised a very important issue, that this notion of sustainability is something new, in the sense that it has been there for generations to the people concerned, right? So I think many of you are familiar with the notions of sustainability or sustainable development, which of course has come into exist only in the late 1980s with the WCED uh, uh, definitions of sustainable development, so and so forth. So therefore, I think it is vital to see that these notions of sustainability has been with the indigenous peoples for generations, and they have, uh, since they have shared a very symbiotic or an intricate relationship with nature. So I think that is one way of putting within that notions of self determinations or the nature of politics or political questions. And we of late also come across terms like environmental citizenship or ecological citizenship. I think the very nature of where indigenous peoples are, sustainably using their resources, or in other words, we can say that uh, that notions of custodianship or stewardship towards nature, I think, was very much with the indigenous people when it comes to the man-nature interactions or relationships. So therefore, I think the idea of this environmental citizenship, ecological citizenship, whatever we call today, I think were very much embedded and already there with them. So this is something which I personally feel that should be taken away or a take away from the deliberations from Holiram Terang. And he has also begin talking about, try to contextualize by talking about the Karbi Anglong Autonomous Councils and so forth. So I really appreciate him. The being we most of the politicians in this region, or for that matter, like in the country as a whole, are pretty much ignorant about many of these very vital issues, but he is uh, very much informed about, and then cover all these important issues and what it means to be you know uh, uh, the notions of self determination should really focus on. Yeah. And uh, Uttam discussed about the very flaws and weakness of sixth schedule. So many of us feel that a sixth schedule in some sense provide a kind of autonomy to many of the tribal communities. But he rightly pointed out that the very notion of autonomy needs to be decolonized first, right? We need to relook into or try to deconstruct, I think, these notions of autonomy itself, and where for example, he cited examples about where the rights to forest is limited to the autonomous council, where only the reserve forest belongs to the state, and only few unclassified forests are within the ambit of the autonomous councils. So therefore, we could really see that the notions of autonomy or autonomous council itself is very much limited in terms of the functions and the prerogatives or the power which they enjoy. And this must be the cases across in states, like whether it's in Meghalaya or maybe in Mizoram or various other places. Uh, and he has also given an example about the zooming agriculture practices, which of course uh, many of the policy planners and then the ecologists, so to say, are very much still uh, guided by these notions of Western civilization and discourse, or maybe you can say the Western science thinking, and which of course tends to have a negative notions against such traditional forms of farming. So in that case, I think uh, one can actually raise the issue of sustainability vis-a-vis the transformations of agriculture practices which we have seen over the past few decades. So I think there are also few case studies even available in the literatures and various other informed journal papers or maybe in books uh, further on this discussion. And he uh, conclude his beautifully by trying to give an example of what forests mean to the Dimasa community, as Hagra, that is known as elderly, or maybe I would say it's the form of perceived to be a mother earth, which provides a substantial or a subsistence to the people concerned, or those people who inhabit that particular geographical region. So both the discussions, in some way, the first and the second speakers, there's really a good connections between them, and uh, I hope even the participants would really benefit out of it, and we can now open up for questions and answer. So for those of you who would not who don't want to really post the questions in persons, may post in the chat box. I can read out on your behalf. So we can now open for the questions and answer here.
Can I ask questions?
Yeah, please.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for chairing the session. And I see one of our speakers has already left the meeting. Am I right? Holiram Taram, sir, is he still in the meeting?
Maybe his connection dropped. He might come back. It might be there.
Okay, so maybe I just ask the questions now, and when he comes back, I can repeat that again. I have three questions to our speakers, and welcome all the participants to chip in. The first question is related to knowledge production. We know that over the years, I think traditional ecological knowledge or traditional forest knowledge, traditional subject-wise knowledge, this topic, this research topic has been quite popular. since I would say 1990s. So we do have like academia-wise, we do have place-specific and people-specific, maybe not covering all, but production of knowledge there. But I often wonder how useful they be in, especially political discourse related to the ways of life, related to day-to-day rights and possibly resistance. So the question related to this part is that do our speakers and participants think that there should be some kind of institutionalized preservation or institutionalized uh, um, dissemination, learning, creating, preserving this kind of knowledge. So, in terms of institutional, I mean, like, should there be, in your view, should there be some kind of like civil society group, like an NGO, and who an NGO receiving fund from whom, or it should be totally self-sustainable, or it should be part of the school curriculum, and then if that's the case, how it should be designed and for what purpose, through what process. These are the two common existing form of continuing so-called traditional knowledge in a formal way. So I wonder what's your opinion or views about institutionalize this part and how useful this academic work on traditional ecological knowledge be. And then the second question is I try to touch the core of the really interesting and I learn a lot from the share of our speakers is the appropriate form of governance. So because I am totally an outsider, so I would not dare to judge the right or wrong, or this is appropriate, or that is that shouldn't be there, kind of things related to the autonomy or autonomous setting that we're talking here, but more on what might be the appropriate way to arrange governance. So in the literature, again, academic literature, we have there's like a debate about a hybrid form of governance. That is the basic right or the or the regime of the land set by the central government, while the usage of it and also especially this process of making decision of using the resources more like more in line with the existing or the traditional form of governance. And under this debate about the hybrid form of governance, there's also another voice saying that how does this system sort of ensuring equality, ensuring the equal participation from all the people living there? Should that include people who don't hold a communal identity there? Should that how do we ensure that, for example, gender equality is executed in the real sense? Although it might kind of be the opposite of the customary law. So, for example, like women cannot not entitled to certain rights of what is considered as property. So that's my second question. And the third question might be a little bit controversial. Again, it's from the literature. Like I have read so many things writing about indigenous people being the best steward of nature because their way of life is very much in line with nature, and which I personally feel that from Holiram Terang's speech, I kind of like finally get to the depth of this description. However, I also think about, because culture is diversified and it's constantly changing, and also people's motivation, agency is not like on a still state. So what about when people who have indigenous identity but not using the resource in the sustainable way? How do we address this? Because I feel like to address this into this narrative of being the best stewardship would kind of like would strengthen this argument even more to be more inclusive. But that's my view. So that's my three questions. I hope they're clear.
Uh, Thank you, Lynn, for your interesting questions. But do we take questions individually or do we take in group? Vasundhara.
We can decide if there are more questions, maybe that are somebody who would like to take, related to these three questions.
Yeah. Okay.
Then we can take a pool which are more connected, and then we can.
Right.
Yeah.
I think maybe Haukip had a question.
Actually, I have a question, but not so much related to that. Maybe I'll ask later.
Okay. Then should I answer Lynn's question?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know whether I have properly understood your question or not, but then I think the first question you are talking about institutionalizing the traditional knowledge system, maybe ecological or any other form of knowledge system. Yeah, I think that is a very apt question that one always asks or talk about. But the point is, when there is so much bias, uh, there are so many bias against the traditional knowledge system, and we know that educational system is totally under the government control. So it is not easy for the community to have a parallel kind of system where they can transform their knowledge system. For instance, we are totally dependent on the kind of education system that has been framed by the government, and this whole education system is oriented towards certain end that you are aware of. So the parents, and since that kinds of gives you more uh, economic security by way of getting jobs, government jobs and other things, high end salary jobs. So naturally people would be more driven towards that kind of educational system. So there becomes a problem, and that's why I am saying that when I say that when colonial government itself was very quick in picking up from the traditional practice and introduce the same in the formal education curriculum, something of that kind should be done. But I think you cannot just leave it to the community, you cannot just leave it to NGOs, because this is also part of the larger kind of scheme of education. So that is where I think the address has to be decolonization of this attitude towards the traditional system has to begin at it should happen at every level, not only at the grassroots level, because the grassroots level alone cannot sustain it, because it is connected to it with larger resource use system, larger political economy. Until and unless you are not free from that political economy, you cannot create an alternative system, in my understanding. That's what I feel. And again, this is also connected to your third question about the best stewardship, ecological stewardship uh, by the indigenous people. We often forget that even this indigenous people, the leadership today is also part of this larger political economy, or this whole education system, and they are oriented in that particular form. So there lies the problem, and today that's the reason we find that the leadership in the autonomous councils are also replicating what is being, planned by the government at the top level. So I think this rather than top-down approach, we can also think about bottom-up kind of approach, but that can happen only when even the traditional leadership, political leadership, is also decolonized from the kind of lot of unlearning has to be done actually at the every level. That's what I feel, because only by the traditional communities themselves, it's not sufficient, because as I said, they're part of the larger political economy. So unlearning has to be at every level. Not only, why would only give that a burden to the indigenous people for ecological stewardship, right? Whereas they themselves are product of or victim of the larger political economy. So this decolonization must happen at every level, and we can definitely create an alternative model by bringing in the traditional knowledge of these indigenous communities. So I think that is what I can uh, relate as of now. And the best form of government that you talk about, I think that is actually a very difficult question to address. But again, it is also connected with the larger political autonomy, political economy. Unless there is a change in at that level, I think change at regional level or local level is going to be very difficult, I think. I don't know whether I have addressed or properly or not.
Thanks, Uttam. I can also see Holiram has joined again, I think. Holida, you're here, right?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. So I can just quickly repeat. Actually, Ruyu had 3 questions, so Uttam was just responding to those. It was for the speaker, so I can try to quickly summarize those 3 questions. And I see there's a Shayan Banerjee who also has a very related question, so we can take both of them up. So her first question was about, when we think of these questions of preservation and conservation from the perspective of indigenous knowledge systems, a lot of which has been written in the academia, do we think of some form of institutionalization of this kind of conservation? What would an institutionalized form of preserving or conserving knowledge from the perspective of indigenous knowledge systems? What would it look like? What would its form be? Who would carry it out? Would it be carried out by NGOs? Would it be carried out by communities, community organizations? So that was one. Is there an imagination we have of institutionalizing this idea of conservation? The second question was of what might be the proper way to govern the commons, and that many times when we talk of community community ownership and community control, then how does one ensure equal participation within the community? And does it mean that, for example, if you have different communities cohabiting, then how does one think of people outside the community? We can think of women. So a lot of times within community institutions, women don't have a lot of say, voice, control in that sense. That was the second question. And the third question was,
Could you please repeat the second one?
the second one was basically to think of how do we think of governing commons in a way that ensures equal participation within the community as well. So we have social hierarchies within the community, and so how do we tackle that? That also sort of Shayan's question echoes that, where he says, I'll read his first comment later, but he says, my second comment is that traditional ecological knowledge are often formed through traditional social hierarchies, gender or caste or clan-based access and use of resources. So if decolonization means to streamline that traditional ecological knowledge, will it be enough to break those social hierarchies? And the third question that Ruyu had was, in the context of changes coming about within what Uttam was mentioning within political economy, and if I give an example of saying that there's a middle class that has emerged within tribal and indigenous communities whose forms of life are no longer that kind of traditional sustainable, then how do we think about that?
Actually, sorry, Vasundhara, can I Yeah, can I say a little bit about my question? Thank you for summarizing it. The third question I want to ask, what's your view about the appropriate form of governance? So, because I'm interested in a current debate about a hybrid form of governance, that is the basic rights, basic human rights, and also rights to land, and the land regimes, or like the common system governing land, is given by central government, which applies to all the province or states in in the same country. But the process of discussing how to use resources and also arrange access to resources related to localized condition is through local governance local governance system. So it could be kind of like a council system, and it could be like representative from various society, but this part is done more locally. So this hybrid form of governance is kind of, do you think it makes sense? Or do you see the flow of it and not appropriate for especially Assam we are talking about? That's my third question. Thank you.
Yeah. So do I respond? I got all the three questions. Am I audible? Yeah. All three questions. One is institutionalizing the idea of conservation. I think one day or the other it has to be done. And if even the international conferences on climate change and all that, they've been dilly-dallying on this. And if at all the world is to be conserved properly, then the knowledge of the indigenous people has to be incorporated in the method of conservation. So some kind of an installation has to be done, and it can be done. It can be easily done, I'm saying. The only thing that is the will of the state. The will of the state. That's one. And then number two is I think about the participation of community. There is a hierarchy of knowledge and all that. Yes, it is there. In the tribal communities, both in the Karbi, Dimas, and others also, there are some knowledge which are exclusive in one way to women only. Exclusive to women only, or rather, we can say that the men do not try to learn those knowledge. Like one is making yarn, then cooking in one way, up to one third, then making clothes, weaving, and all that, and some kind of food and all that. Those are almost exclusive to women only, and it is not. Men are not prevented to do those things, but men generally do not go for to that kind of knowledge. And there are, of course, other exclusive areas where only men do. Those are on the rituals and all that. But normally in agriculture, in planting, all those things, it is done both by men and women. So I think participation of community can be done by all the hierarchies and all sections of the community. And the only thing is that there are some areas in Karbi Anglong, within the Karbis, I can say that except for few areas in the system of running the society, even women are allowed. But in the formal meetings, of the village, and which goes up to the society and all that, women are not allowed to participate. But nowadays, even if they participate also, they are not discouraged. They are not discouraged. So that the participation of women also can all, I think after discussions about that, this can be incorporated in one. And the other issue which I think Ruyu has brought up is about the emergence of middle class. Yes, the middle class has emerged, and many people, I think this is the standpoint, this is a stand taken by many of the academic area, academicians, that the question of self-determination, the question of autonomy has come because the middle class has emerged in these communities, in the Karbi, in the Garo, in the Khasi, in the Dimas, and all that. I can say that yes, in one way you can say that, but middle class, the emergence of middle class, mm, cannot be a deterrent to the conservation, conserving the nature and all that in a traditional way. And that's why in the beginning itself, I was saying that the knowledge of indigenous peoples in conservation can be incorporated in the modern knowledge system. It can be done. I believe it can be done. And as for the use of resources and access to resources, it has to be done in it has to be decided by the community. It has to be decided by community. So the whole thing of governance has to be thought not necessarily from the colonial angle, or you can say the Western angle. Not from the Western angle, colonial angle. The traditional method of running an area, administering an area, running a community, running a kind of livelihood, those can be, rather must be incorporated in the modern way of administration. I think that can be done. Thank you.
Could I just add just a brief comment as well, since we're having this discussion? I also thought, just taking off from what Uttam was saying, in terms of political economy being so central, I think especially the question that maybe many of us grapple with often is precisely the question of change that Ruyu was also pointing to. And changes in the political economy, even whom, Uttam was also speaking about within a changing context, how then, that practice becomes transformed into possibly, seen as ecologically degrading, that with increased pressure on land, with, common lands being lost, being alienated, less time for allowing them to renew and rejuvenate. So there is a certain dynamic to the changing political economy, which is linked, of course, to the way in which resources are used, which I think is quite central to thinking about the questions of whether it's emergent classes that have moved away, which relates to political economy. So one was that I just wanted to reiterate that I think, I agree that this question that keeps coming up, which is that how the way in which people interact with nature, and therefore the knowledge that they build, is also not static. It's not, they have their knowledge has also, indigenous knowledge is not one fixed knowledge that existed in the same way in 1800s as it does today. Indigenous knowledge and understanding also has gone on evolving with their evolving ways in which they have had to meet their requirements to subsist and reproduce themselves, to labor. So I think that's one way, one framework within which one can think of the question of change, very much linked to these questions of the material way in which people have to live and survive, and the crisis of resources degradation also then has to be rooted within that story. I thought the other question, which is this very relevant and pertinent question about social hierarchies within, about maybe relationships between different communities. Northeast is a context where we see a lot of, has been home to a lot of ethnic conflict and strife and competition for limited resources amongst communities, between communities. But I think from seeing certain processes and learning through those processes over the last few years while I've been here, that I also think that there's a very important role of historical experience of struggling and fighting for autonomy and for rights. That actually is once again a dynamic and a creative and a productive process. So, the way in which, I mean, if I was just to give an example, something that was talked about a lot with the Kisan Andolan, with the farmers movement, um, and the way in which people have been writing, commentators who have been part of this process have been talking about, for example, how gradually caste has emerged as a question within Punjab, but not so much in UP. So, depending on different locations, the dynamic of power relations and hierarchies within them, how are they linked to, in this case, the agricultural process, um, as well as not just simply that how are they linked to the political economy of agriculture, but also what has been the history of political struggles in the regions. And therefore they also are drawing on earlier historical political lineages and building on earlier struggles and political lineages. So I do think that there's also an important role of the historical experience of resistance and struggle that goes about. It builds on that, and the experience of struggle also plays an important role in bringing many of these hierarchies to light. You think of the role of women, for example, as they begin to play a more important role within the process of struggle. You have, these are slow and gradual processes. You may have some women who emerge as more vocal. As they emerge as more vocal, they begin to have more experiences. They may have to speak at different places. Speaking in the public might create a conversation in the home. That conversation in the home leads to, it could be leads to certain reflection of one's position. It can be a negotiation and a fight to break certain boundaries and restrictions. So I think when we're talking about all of these questions, also, autonomy is something, not institutionalized in these processes of sixth schedule and these other kinds of ways, these technical ways of dealing with autonomy. And we think of it as Holida said, as the right of a people to govern the land with their wisdom. That's something that is a political struggle, and it's constantly moving. And I think that dynamic of the struggle also is something that need not break social hierarchies, but also has the potential to do that. And if we are to think of, like I said, a dynamism in ideas of indigenous knowledge systems, control over resources, governing commons in a collective way through community institutions, that community institutions are not static, that community institutions also transform as people are making these claims and asserting their rights. That's what I wanted to say. You can take over.
Yeah, I think in the chat box we have a few questions. Sayan Banerjee, I have one basic question which is also a current bone of contention in the decolonization bandwagon in global academia and practice. So what exactly do speakers in this panel and others in this workshop mean by decolonization? This is the first question. My second comment is that traditional ecological knowledge are often formed through traditional social hierarchies, gender or caste or clan-based access and use of resources. So if decolonization means to streamline that traditional ecological knowledge, will it be enough to break social hierarchies? So these are the two questions from Sayan Banerjee. So if the two session speakers would like to comment on this, yeah.
Maybe you can read Jasodra's also, it's sort of related and she's responding.
Yashodhara Borthakur has written, isn't indigenous knowledge system also an institution in itself? It already has internal working mechanism to address social and economic aspects of indigenous livelihoods. The decolonization here, I think, is directed at colonial attitudes towards indigenous knowledge systems. Yeah, these are the two comments.
I have already commented on Jasudhara's chat that I read. Now there are decolonizing knowledge, colonial system. Yeah, this is to be done. At the same time, the problem of hierarchy in some communities are there, especially not necessarily caste based because there is a question of caste, but on gender basis. There are some areas where women are not allowed to participate. And in the Karbi, there are also some areas where even men are not allowed to participate. Their exclusivity here. But I think that can be corrected very easily. It won't be a problem. In a Karbi society, this gender is not a problem, will not be a problem. If it is beneficial to the whole community, men will allow women to participate. Women will allow men to participate. That's what I believe.
Yeah, Uttam, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I would like to start with what Jasudhara said. I quite agree with that. There is within the community itself, there is an institutional process through which these practices or these social practices are enacted, and how they are transformed from generation to generations. There are different forms and different processes of that, and it is already an institutional process. I quite agree with her. But I think what we are discussing here is about bringing it to the you know uh, uh, streamline it in the sense that it gets formalized with the kind of institutional mechanism for transfer of knowledge system, uh, the way it's happening in the modern education system. I think we are talking about that, and that is also in a way important, uh, because because of the change in the uh, you know entire social fabric today. Like if I would say that I grew up in the village, sitting by the fireside in winters, listening to the elders talking about so many different things, like from the past, our migration and our ritual systems and things like that. We learned it in the village, but nowadays, that thing is hardly there because either somebody or one of the parents are working. So first thing in the morning they rush is to send the children to school. They themselves have to prepare to go to office. So these kind of uh, process, like if we can call it urbanization or anything else, it has kind of broken down this entire process which was happening traditionally in terms of transferring the knowledge system. And because the traditional society's knowledge system is always transferred through apprenticeship. I am currently not in Guwahati. I am in Gunjung. I am like just trying to understand a system of uh, harvest festival, which is done for 7 days. This festival is celebrated for 7 days, but its process starts 1 year ahead, and in the entire year, this youth, they prepare for this penultimate 7 days kind of event. And here I have seen this is how the traditional youth, they kind of integrate themselves into the social process, and learning from the elders in the society how is to be done, how what is to be done, when and how, these kind of things they learn. So these processes are gradually they are uh, uh, becoming marginalized because of this existing political economic process. uh, like I said, that children would prefer to go to school than rather work in the field. So how would they be, imbibing that traditional ecological practices, where the whole practice itself becomes alien to them? What they are taught in the school is totally different. I have always been taught about, zooming is very bad. I have always been talked about that people who do not have any written records, they do not have any history. But if we look at it, history, it is just one way of memorializing the past. There are different societies, different cultures have different ways of memorializing the past. What we are doing today, we are, marginalizing other practices and bringing to the fore one particular system, and that is what I think is needs to be corrected. That is where I think we should reorient our focus to the traditional systems, and that is what I also think that it's a process of decolonization, a process of unlearning and relearning. Now, I also understand that these social processes in these traditional communities happen through certain hierarchies and so forth. And I personally feel that these problems are there in traditional societies, in the indigenous communities. It is not some indigenous community or their culture is not something, uh, you know, mm, free from any flaws. Like there are problems, but like Basundara said, that these communities have always evolved and tried to address these problems in their own way, in their own ways. For example, in the Masa society, girls are not supposed to inherit, landed property. It is only the household utensils and basically weaving paraphernalia, they are passed on to the women. Now these things are gradually changing. Nowadays, people are also transferring landed property to the uh, girl child. So it's not that, like Basundara said, it's not that traditional societies are something static. It is also evolving with time, and that is why we also find formation of middle class in the tribal societies. We also find this political leadership who is kind of, educated in other institutional kind of education, and they are also imbibing in their political actions. So these problems are there, and the communities also, they kind of accommodate and evolve. They are doing that throughout the ages. The point here is that how do we reorient these traditional processes and bring to the spotlight? That's what is the problem, and that's what I understand is institutionalization. Actually, thank you.
Uh, can I chip in and following Uttam's answer?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sorry, Parth, you said you just have a question. Please allow me to speak first. I completely agree with you, like from my, your viewpoint, from my field work with Mumpa and my understanding about some of the Tibetan nomadic um, traditional life and also the indigenous people in Taiwan, that rituals nowadays, because it's a change way of life, very much embedded in the political economy, as you said, rituals and different ways of doing the narration has replaced the kind of like more intimate time by the fireplace, accompanied with stories from the elder generation. The way of passing on communal memories, and which is quite a big part of identity. The process itself has changed and kind of like stepped through the control, the control of whichever we may identify. So I want to iterate sort of the starting point of my question about institutionalization is that I was trying to hint whether there are like alternative way, but more organized and more aggregately address the knowledge attached to a certain group, not specifically subject to political agency for any campaign, but more maintained as the way it was, quite fluid and quite intimate. I've seen cases myself, that's why I came up with this question. For example, indigenous tribes in Taiwan, they organize summer schools for the younger generation, because the out migration has been a very serious problem there, and unemployment. So the family system kind of like quite shattered because of the impact of political economy. So they organize summer school and building things from scratch. It's like one year after another, they think they learn from the past year experience and then adding on what kind of curriculum it should be there. Or it will draw more participants and coming together to this 2 to 3 weeks event, and also combined with kind of like passage to adulthood, attaining the tribal identity of the community. And another example is the one with the Tibetan nomads, that they government control school education is kind of like everywhere, and China is not an exception. That would be like a very diplomatic way to say that. Well, this is YouTube streaming. Sorry about that. So the other way to talk about my identity, or to talk about things not included in the formal education, they sort of form a kind of like a traveling school. So to go along with the family that has to go on their pastoralist grazing route, and carrying a set of learning experience, mostly focusing on language, with the children or whoever want to join these courses. And this is completely funded by civil society, by individual donation, and has no relation to the government. It keeps its kind of like unruly form of education. So these examples kind of like can like it opened up my imagination about education itself. And but related to the decolonization topic we have today, I kind of like wonder, the decolonization we're talking about, does it have a specific direction? Are we talking about removing all the power domination, being against that in general? Or we are identifying a specific source of power? Are we identifying the Indian government, especially which level of the Indian government? And are we identifying how Indian government sort of, I don't know what the right word, took over the colonial legal setting, took over the British colonial uh, regulations, pass on that, not changing them? Or I don't know, like, what kind of decolonization we kind of like focus on right now? In I would like to sort of clearly identify the structure or the mechanism of this kind of domination we're talking about. But is it needed in this event? I'm also inquiring your opinion and reference. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, can I say something? Hello. Yeah. See, one thing is that the knowledge system till now is, of course, more or less is colonial, and maybe some kind of Indian version has come into the knowledge system in some kind. Now the point is, we have this formal education structure where the syllabus is made by a central body and also incorporated by the state systems also. We have the syllabus, in the syllabus, see, just as I think dance, music are also part of the syllabus in Indian school system. If you can put in Bhatkhande music as a syllabus in the central system, and if you can put in Manipuri dance, then this what do you call the South Indian Bharatanatyam and all that as mm, part of the education curriculum. Why not this indigenous system? Why not? It can be done, and I can say about Karbi Anglong, we have this organization called Karbi Cultural Society, which runs the annual Karbi Youth Festival. I was very much part of that since the beginning. Now it's 48 year running now. I was part of this for the last 2-3 decades. And now Kargi Cultural Society has been having classes, schools on dances, on instruments on flute, then drums and dances and traditional songs and all that. And those are now being coded, so it can be, you know, this you can. They also do have classes, and they also do have tests. I mean, examinations on those issues, on those subjects and all that. So, if suppose a student wants to opt for a Karbi dance instead of Manipuri dance or a Bharatanatyam dance, or if student wants to go in for music, maybe a Dimasa music or a Karbi music, it can be an instrumental music, or it can be some kind of drum music and all that. That can be done. Even on the question of conservation of ecology itself, even on the question of cultivating land, especially here will be on the hilly land and all that. I think that can be brought in. There are so many institutions which are experimenting on these issues. I think the Indian Agricultural Research Institute and this one in Jorhat Titabar on agriculture and that they have brought in some new methods of cultivation and all that. So on other issues also that can be brought in. I think it is only the will of the state, the will of the government. If the government wants it, this traditional knowledge can very much be incorporated in the formal education system. So it depends on that only. And I think we have to, we have, I think we need to have a kind of a movement for that. That's all.
Yeah, other participants? Yeah.
Yeah, I think Partho wants to ask one, and Haukip earlier wanted to ask, so maybe both of them can.
Yes, can I ask?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, my question is actually a little bit, slightly different from what we have been discussing, and this is my question is to Uttam. So, in your in your speech, you're saying that you're actually rightly pointing out that the flaws in sixth schedule or autonomous district councils, where autonomous district councils are given like the power to make laws or on matters related to education, agriculture, or others, but not on the matters of reserved forests or forest reserves. So I find that point very interesting, and but my question is, why do you think, or what do you think is the reason behind this? Or why do you think is the government not putting the subject matter of reserved forests under the ambit of autonomous district councils? I mean, especially in this time when traditional ecological knowledge is in the boom. Indigenous knowledge about ecology is in the boom, and especially in the area of conservation and wildlife protection. Why do you think is the government not putting this particular matter of reserved forests under the ambit of autonomous district councils, when it allows the autonomous district councils to make laws and to make laws with respect to education and other matters? And also, you seem to suggest that this particular matter, this reserved forest, should also come under the ambit of autonomous district councils, if I understand you correctly. And if it is so, and how do you see, the conservation? How do you see the conservation? I mean, when we say reserved forest, it's mostly for conservation purpose, like conservation of animals, conservation of wildlife, protection of wildlife. So, do you think if this particular matter is put under autonomous district councils, do you think that the forests or the animals, the wild animals, the wildlife would be more well protected, or what do you say? I mean, what do you say about this? Or how do you kind of see this? I mean, like how do we deal with this thing? I mean, you know, in the one hand we have the the government not allowing the autonomous district council to have a say on forests, and in this intersection, what is your point and what is your view? Thank you.
Yeah, see, for forest, even if forest is given totally to the autonomous council also, I don't think that the council will be able to preserve it properly. Because, okay, the reserve forests are under the state government, only the unreserved or unclassified forests are with the autonomous council. Now, forget about reserve forest. About roads also, about the drinking water facilities, then irrigation and all this also, they come under the council, especially in Karbi Anglong and Dimasur districts. But even in those issues also, the council cannot work according to its own wish because of many issues. Number one is the fund is being provided by the central government to the state government. Part of it is given by the state government, and they do not provide the fund on time. Number one. And number two is whatever schemes are being given by the council, it may get rejected by the state because on paper the councils have the power to make its own budget, but that has to be incorporated in the state budget. So ultimately, what happens is that they normally the state government ignores the budget suggestions given by the council, and they have their own way of putting things in the budget. So even if reserve forest is given to the councils also, then maybe some kind of progress, some kind of development will be there. But what we have to see is that the present system of governance in India is still a kind of a colonial system. Though the Constituent Assembly wanted to make it really an independent, democratic, socialist republic, but especially for those communities in the northeast, and also those for the marginalized communities, the state would like to ignore it as much as possible. The state, that means the government would like to exploit those things, would like to exploit the resources. So the very intent of the state, that is the government running the country since the beginning of the independence, even till now, they are doing it in the same way. So marginalized people, indigenous, small tribal communities are always being ignored. So until and unless we try to change the whole system, then we won't have a kind of a real people's governance. I think that's what I would like to say. Uttam can chip in.
Thank you, Olida. In fact, you have answered the whole question. I would just like to add a few more points. If Haukip is listening, I mentioned the forest only to showcase that the power sharing between the state and the council, autonomous council, is very, what to say, not in balance. It is like always in favor of the state. Like even if the departments are given under the control of autonomous council, finances are held by the state government. So it always becomes finance becomes the biggest problem in the administration of autonomous areas. Now, having said that, when we talk about reserve forest, this whole colonial forest policies, actually its origin is in the colonial rule. And for the colonial rule, they looked at the forest as something which needs to be extracted. This needs to be extracted for economic benefit or maximization of colonial economic need. That's why we know in Assam they came up with the policy called Westland policy. They see that lots of lands are lying under the forest cover. They are not being utilized. So for them, it is a waste. Whereas in traditional system do not look at it forest something as, as a resource that needs to be extracted, and they do not look at it. That's the reason why I said how the Dimasa people. That's just an example how Dimasa people look at the forest as a uh, elderly land, as a provider. They do not look at forest as something that can be extracted for their economic benefit. They take whatever is required for that particular year, because they know that the land is always there and they can always go back every year and extract whatever they require only for that particular year. Now, this whole resource extraction practice of the traditional communities and the government of India today is totally, you know, at two ends of the pole. So that is where I actually try to bring in the forest policy, but it also the question of forest to also to showcase that the whole autonomy idea of autonomy is not adequate. I think this is what I would like to add to Holida for an answer to Hawkip. Yeah, but then I would also like to thank Ryu for bringing in some examples from Thailand and Tibet, how the alternative models are also being created. And I think Holida has also addressed that partially. He talks about the Karbi Cultural Society, how it has been working towards the nurturing of the traditional Karbi culture. Similar kind of practices are also initiatives are also done elsewhere, I think, but at a smaller level. But at the same time, I also agree with Holida in saying that if you know Bhatkhande, if Kathak can be included in curriculum, why can't we include the traditional cultural practices in the curriculum? And I think the NEP has also uh, the NEP also talks about that in that because they talk about incorporation of a local element in the curriculum. So I think we need to take the opportunity of it and include the traditional systems or traditional cultural systems in the formal institutions or curriculum system. Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions from the participants before I read out the questions
Yes,
by Shivangi Kausik? Yeah, Partha. Yeah,
yes,
please.
yes. So, my question is that as one part of my question has already been answered by Uttam. It is about traditional practices, and as I have been in my field, which is Majuli, Assam, I have seen that there's a community which makes handmade potteries, which many of you have heard of. So they have been now in a conflict with the government because they cannot dig the soil anymore, which they need for the pottery, because government is saying because of that erosion is happening. And as Uttam has said, as Zoom cultivation, there are many misinformations in the knowledge system. As Holiram sir has also said that community fishing due to Karbi Langbi project, it is decreasing the fish. From the regions that you both are being, and is there any practices that has been threatened or kind of verge of extinction because of the changes in environment and the because of the policies or politics or anything? And I would just like to add one point from my field is about bringing practice into education policies. One is mask making, which is a very old tradition. The one Hotradikar from that Hotra has got PhD degree because of the mask making culture, and it has been taught in universities, and he has went abroad. So if that can be brought into picture, why cannot other practices? So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, there are so many things that can be brought in. See, I can tell you people about, I told you about on community fishing. In other areas also, I believe, but in Karbi Anglong, in within the Karbis, there are some hills which are supposed to be sacred, which are supposed to be sacred. The Khasis, they have these sacred groves. I think many of you know about it. The sacred groves. And they could preserve this because when the British came in at that time, also they had this very strong CM-ship. They have this Khasi traditional chief system. And even after independence, also, even if there is state government and the district council, even the district council does not have power over this CM-ship, this Darbar, Khasi Darbars they call it. But unfortunately, among the Karbis, we do have our own systems of governance, systems of worship, systems of doing many other things, and we also have sacred hills, which we can call Than. Than. See, now, as you know, in India, somebody builds a temple somewhere else, and when the authorities, the state government or whatever government wants to demolish it for some making roads, something like that, then it is opposed, and that particular temple is not demolished. But so many hills in Karbi Anglong has been what do you call they have been denuded, either through this logging or maybe after for construction of roads and all that. And the Karbis, they're aware of this, but the Karbis does not have much power to go against all these things because the representatives to the councils are also very weak because the council itself is dependent on the state government, on money and finance and other issues and all that. So until unless the authority of the community, until unless the authority of the traditional community, until unless the traditional system is embodied legally in the governance system of the country, then this will go on. That's all.
Yeah, I agree with Holida on that completely. I think what we are doing is that we are alienating people from yet. These are stone jar sites. So Neolithic stone jar sites, and they're completely under jungle area, lying unattended. Similar kind of sites are available in Indonesia, in Laos, Laos Democratic Republic, wherein it has been conferred UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2018. But here in the Mahasau, everything is lying under the jungle growth. So what we have done recently, we have approached the Autonomous Council, and we suggested them that rather than appointing one peon or chokidar to look after that one particular site, where it is beyond human this thing, that capacity that one person can keep it clean whole year. And if you're employing one person, if you go by the minimum wage of the state government, it leads to something about more than 1.5 lakhs rupees only on the salary of that one particular person, who cannot anyways keep the place clean. So we suggested the Autonomous Council that why don't you get into a kind of agreement with the community or the nearest village. Let the village take care of the sites keeping clean, and some kind of financial assistance can be provided to the villagers. So the Autonomous Council also accepted that proposal, and at least with two sites they have already entered into kind of agreement with the community, and the sites are now they are relatively much cleaner than what it used to be before. So you have to give the sense of ownership to the community. Only when you do that, the community will come forward in its proper preservation or its maximum utilization. So that alienation of the community has to stop, and the community has to be re-empowered. I think only then the problem, many of the problems will be resolved. It is really very, very funny to say that one community engaging in pottery work is causing soil erosion. I think there are many other government activities and actions that is doing more harm to the river ecosystem, like the dams themselves for generation of power. So I think it is very funny, and that's where I think this whole decolonization should happen at every level, every level. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, I'll read out Shivangi's comment. My question is to all three speakers. Most work on indigenous communities and their specific relations to distinct ecosystems in Assam has been undertaken by anthropologists from outside of these communities. There is very little conversation around what actually are the aspirations of the community and how do individuals within communities articulate their relationships to their ecosystem. Do habitat individuals constitute themselves as intricate part of these ecosystems or outside of them? Yeah, if the speakers would like to respond to this.
Yeah, Uttam, go ahead.
Let me read the question first. I was just
So any other speakers would like to come in? I mean, any other participants?
Yeah, can I?
Yeah, Shubha, yeah. Please.
I have been closely attending this, and I have come up with some of the observations. Uh, you know, I have started questioning what actually the decolonizations of knowledge it is, and how the knowledge is being constructed, and we are exactly pointing towards the constructions of knowledge. So when I started questioning, so I found that you know while the construct while speaking of about the constructions of the knowledge, then as Uttamda said, it is perhaps instead of top-down approach to the bottom-up approach. So in the same lines, Uttamda also said the same things. He has pointed out, from the very grass, 0 point to the 0 point informations, in order to make maximums input, and then encoding all those informations from the ground zeros to a certain level of appro approximation of those informations, so that we can counter the and the worldview of colonial mindsets. So if I have a questions, if we can say that decolonizations is a constructions. So I see many of the institutions in Northeast India that has been prevalent. So in the same way, the autonomy or the institutions of autonomy, for instance, the BTAT, the Karbi Autonomous District Councils, are not these are an extensions of colonial mindsets, colonial ideas? Can we say that? And the second questions I was thinking that you know in order to reorder the things, the indigenous ways of thinking, the ideas, and all this we synthesize it in a singular forms and make an institutions like autonomous councils in order to consolidate and make an institutions from which indigenous ideas, indigenous the voice can be consolidated. So if every community, if every tribes or the sub tribes in Assam, so in particular, or in Northeast India in general, start thinking like that, so every community will be demanding will be demanding, and some kind of we will be finding a multicultural problems. For instance, if every institutions, if every community starts demanding for in such indigenousness, it will create much, you know, problems in terms of politics of resistance rather than politics of recognitions in the which has been said by Charles Taylor while speaking about the multiculturalisms. So that has been the second questions. This will, I think, this will create another level of problem also, the problem of relative deprivations. For instance, one community has been given certain degree of powers and autonomy, then the another group of peoples or the community, they will start thinking the same, that they have from 10 points they have been provided 6.6 point power. Okay, so the other organizations, the other institutions will start also thinking that why we are to remain to 5, not, we should also move forward, we have to reinstate ourselves, we have to move, bypass them, we have to move towards 8 point. So the power flows from the state. So what I'm trying to say is that, so this will create a kind of relative deprivations, kind of relative competitions in the society. So this will be a problem, create multicultural democratic problems. So why do you what do you think about that then? And um, and right now, after getting your response, I would like to speak further. Thank you.
Yes, Holida, are you going or
No,
wait
Uttam,
for
you
you?
go ahead. Uttam, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. To talk about, I think I'll come to Shivangi's question later. Let me just address Shubha Mangal's concerns. I think you have raised three questions. First is you're talking about whether the sixth schedule is extension of colonial uh, mindset. I think that is the first question. And the second and third question that you are talking about probably is about the problems within the communities or contested kind of uh, identity or territory, whatever, among the communities. I would say that we very often think about Northeast India is a cauldron of conflict, ethnic conflict. Different communities are, against another community up in arms. We always look at it that way because that's how we have been made to look at the whole uh, process of understanding the social transformation, or say the whole process of uh, inter-community relationship, the way of understanding that is actually rooted in the colonial landscape, actually colonial lens. So until and unless we do not create alternative kind of perspective to that, we will continue believing in that contested nature of of the communities, ethnic communities here, and we do have materials for that. Several those are like ignored and like laying on it, and that I can give you one small example, but very very beautiful example about inter-community cultural exchanges. That is that one river, Kopili River. It is the largest tributary of the Brahmaputra in the south bank. It originates in Jaintia Hills, and it falls into Brahmaputra River after meandering through North Kachar Hills, Karbi Anglong, Huzai, Nagaon district, and all that. Now, why I'm saying is that the Kopili, that we call it Kopili, the name originates from the Jaintia language. The Jaintias at the upper reaches of Kopili, now which is submerged, there used to be three waterfalls named after three sisters, and biggest of them are known as Kupli, and that Kupli as a deity is worshipped by Jaintia even today. Okay, now that same Kopili river is also worshipped by the Karbis and the Timasas. Now, when I was in one of my documentation travel, I was attending one such ritual done by Dimasa priest in the Dimasa village. And interestingly, the last four sentences in the entire hymn
he chanted in Karbi language, not in Dimasa language. So I asked him that these 4 lines that you chanted at the last does not sound like Dimasa. He said, no, this is not Dimasa. This is Karbi language. Then I said, why, what kind of chant you are using in the Dimasa, ritual? He said, no, this deity has been borrowed. We borrowed this deity from the Karbis. So at the end of the hymns, we have to at least chant 4 lines in Karbi. Further, he gave me interesting, information that there are some priests who can also, Dimasa priests who can chant the entire hymns in Karbi while doing that ritual. And there are also some Karbi priests who can perform other Dimasa rituals, chanting hymns in Dimasa language. So I mean, it is a very interesting thing. Then I went down to the name. Then suddenly everything came up to me. Because I am from Karbi Anglong. I grew up among. I was born in Karbi Anglong. I grew up among Karbis. I have always heard Karbis calling Kopili River as Kopili, but Dimasas never call Kopili River as Kopili. Dimasas call it Langklang. Whereas we all know, the historians have talked about it, that D means water, and all the river names in Upper Assam, Dibru, Dikhong, Dikho, all these river names starts with D. But whereas when it comes to the river that they are worshipping, how come it starts with Lang? Because Lang is Karbi language. So I asked around many Karbi people, including Dharam Singh Peron, who is like very senior person, one time colleague of Holida, and now he's into Karbi cultural studies and all that. I asked him, what do you call the Kopili River? He said that there is something, but we do not remember now. So I told him, is Langklang sound something to you? Then he said, yeah, Lang is water. So look at it. The river originates in Jaintia Hills. The name given by them, Kopili, and name given by Karbi themselves, they has been taken up by the Dimasas. Karbi themselves have forgotten the name they have given, but taken up the Jaintia names. Look at this, interconnections, beautiful exchanges that is happening among the communities. So if if there are ways of addressing these issues, these conflict issues, because we are looking at landscape in very different manner, we have to change that perspective. If we look at this landscape as eco-cultural zones, then we see that in that eco-cultural zone, a lot of exchanges will emerge between the communities. But if we do not look at it eco-cultural zone, if we look at it political formation, which is very, very rooted in colonial administrative mapping, colonial cartographic project, then becomes a conflict. So I think that these are the things also that needs to be brought in when we talk about decolonization. Otherwise, we will be just repeating this conflict, which is the root in the colonial cartographic project, rooted in colonial cartographic project. So this is very, very important. If we are to empower, even economically also, that can be very, very profitable, because the same eco zone kinds of similar kind of flora and fauna, similar kind of agricultural product. So this eco zone can also become an economic zone. Ecological zone can also become economic zone, which will accrue benefit to the community. So I think this engagement should be at multiple level, and I think that's this very answer kinds of goes to your first question, Subha, that whether it is colonial extension or not. You think about it, whether it is colonial extension or not. Now coming to the Sivangi's question about whether the communities consider themselves as part of this intricate ecosystem. Yes, they do. They do. If you look at the Dimasa belief system, which is called Daiko system, it is very much kind of sacred group kind of concept. It's only that these Daiko has not received that kind of attention. They in this Daiko system, wherever these Daikos are located, those are particularly in the river confluences, which are biodiversity hotspot. Extraction of any kind in that area is prohibited. It is prohibited. So this is very much, they believe, they know, and they understand they are part of this intricate ecosystems. So, yeah, that's my answer.
Okay. Do we have any more questions from the participants here?
I have a question.
Yeah,
Could I
please.
ask? Yes, I wanted to ask about how technology is advancing, and so surveying and mapping of areas, and how the digital divide keeps increasing between, say, the officials and the bureaucracy and the local individuals. And within the local individuals, even if they are getting access to technology, there is a digital divide between gender-based discrimination. So there's lesser access of technology to, say, women. And how is advancement in technology going to impact environmental politics as we enter into the macro narratives of, say, industry 4.0, artificial intelligence? So how is this going to lead more to more exploitation of resources and impact environment? Thank you.
Yeah, would the speakers like to respond to it, or?
Yeah. This technological divide is very much there, but not necessarily on gender basis. It is practically on the question of economic status, in the sense that there are people who can buy smartphones, there are people who cannot buy smartphones, and there are areas where there are no this mobile networks, so they are deprived of this. It's as simple as that. So if sorry, no, it is as simple as that. Uh, could I answer your question, Vani?
In that respect, yes. But my question also had the aspect of a greater exploitation of resources that will get increased by, say, artificial intelligence, like drone mapping and economizing all the resources. So
Yes,
that will
yes,
impact the ecology.
right. See, I think I don't know whether you heard about it. See, there are many areas in Karbi Anglong and Dimhasao, especially in Karbi Anglong, where you know very these minerals are found. Platinum has been found, uranium has been found, and coal and limestone are very common now. And this could be found only by using technology. Hmm. And the local people are not aware of it. Only after it came out in the media, somehow or the other, that many of us could become aware of this. And the local people are not doesn't know the value of platinum, the value of uranium, but the corporates, the government don't know about it. So naturally, technology will be used to map resources. Technology will be used to extract resources. And as the local governments and specifically the local communities do not have the power to prevent it, they just do have to accept the fact. That's all. That's why I'm saying that until and unless we could turn the whole system of governance in the country as a pro-people system, pro-community system, then there will be a problem. This will remain.
Thank you.
Yeah, any more would like to come in? Yeah.
I just wanted to make a short comment. As I've been listening to everyone, I just thought, even in thinking of the institutionalization question, which I think so much of the discussion, ended up being about, being precisely about this, about the powers of the council, how much can be done through the council, or it has to be done through community authorities. Holidas pointing to the fact that it eventually boils down to the will of the state, but the will of the state doesn't come on its own. For that, a movement needs to be built up. But what I was thinking about was also, while we're talking of deconstructing the idea of autonomy, related to that, I thought, was this question of institutionalization, and going to the beginning of the discussion as well. When we're thinking of institutionalizing indigenous knowledge systems or traditional ecological knowledge, that if institutionalization takes place in a manner that or takes place alongside a process where the conditions to actualize that knowledge system or that autonomy, if those conditions are not ensured, then each moment of each step of institutionalization, or setting up and establishing different kinds of institutions, will fail to achieve substantive autonomy if the conditions to ensure this substantive everyday autonomy, which again, I mean, I'm repeating and invoking it once again of what Holida said, which is the right for people to govern themselves according to their wisdom. Now, if for example, if I use an example and say, for example, if we have a policy across the country, which says that you have a land acquisition act, so for public purpose, you can take large amounts of land, through a whole set of processes, and you take away the land, and the system is such that resources are constantly getting alienated. Um, Putting in place a tradition, or even empowering a traditional institution or authorities, eventually has no meaning if the actual substantive content of that autonomy is getting eroded, which is the access and right to your resources, to your land, and these ways of sustaining and subsisting ourselves. So I just thought that that was something also that came across, through all of the discussions, which is that institutionalization simply becomes more of this instrumental process if alongside that the substantive conditions to to ensure and enable actual control of people on their resources. If people don't have actual control of their resources through different kinds of policies, and those resources are getting alienated at different levels, whether it's a coal mining policy, whether it's land acquisition act, whether it's in other places, SCZs or what have you, then parallelly putting in place an autonomous district council gets emptied of the entire purpose for which it was supposed to have been put in place. I just wanted to sort of put that out there.
Right.
I think we are we've taken a good amount of time for discussion. It was, I guess, good we skipped the break, but we are coming to the end, and we wanted to have some just wrapping up time, tying up comments towards the end by Ruyu, just to tie the day. So if there aren't any more questions, then maybe we can just have these final comments from Ruyu. Is that okay?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot, Kipgin, also for moderating the session and for being with us for the discussion. If you have any comments also at the end, please go ahead, and then at the end, Ruyu can wrap up.
Yeah. Can I go on?
No, sorry, I was talking to Kipgin. Sorry.
So we are wrapping up, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I think I have made. The more or less try to give a comment on both the speakers already. So I think over to Lynn. I think maybe she can wrap up the thing. Yeah. Over to you, yeah, Lynn.
Thank you, Kipin, for kindly chairing the session throughout. Thank you for your patience in the organization. And I was hoping to hear some comments from you, but you're just handing the floor to me. I would like to start by responding two points made earlier in the discussion. And thanks to Vasundhara, that's a very important reminder when we talk about institution. So 2 points I want to make before the wrapping up, because I find it particularly interesting and probably I'm quite relevant to answer this. One is raised by Shivangi. I don't know whether Shivangi is still here. Is about anthropology. So this is the anthropologists don't. From outside of these communities, and very little conversation around what is actually the aspiration of the community and how the that part. Okay. So if I may rephrase the question, I would probably ask it from should anthropologists work for the aspirations of the community, or do indigenous people or any of the community, not limited in indigenous criteria, do people need anthropologists to work for them? So this question is built on the context of the discipline of anthropology first appear in documenting people's knowledge for working for the colonial authority, documenting what the way people live their life and to help the outside authority, self-made authority, to better control what is happening on the local land. That is tied to the history of the discipline. But I think since 70s or 80s, I don't quite remember, there's a genre called public anthropology that is seek to reverse this tradition, and of course it's very Americanized. It has its character, but it pushes whoever has inspiration in anthropology to work more for the issues of the public rather than belong it to certain source of power or funding. But I think the most interesting part is, for example, when I first see your question is, okay, can you share who are the anthropologists that works not related to the interest or aspiration of the local community? Because that's sort of a very important information. My point is that I think if we address the question from the other hand, talking about the medium of communication, what might be the powerful tool to engage in discourse in our time through our set of excelling power and related, and what kind of what language should it be, what grammar should it be? Is it still a kind of still a kind of who writes a book and who has a say and who has the place to represent a group of people? I don't think so. But it's still very much worthwhile to think about if we want to change some existing unequal relationship to some extent, to dare to say empower anybody except ourselves, then what are the things that actually needs to be there in the development proposal to be say? Should we, for if I write a proposal, should I think about training maybe women in some village how to use a drone, or how to become a YouTuber? To put that in a very plain way. I hope this is based on my self-identification as some anthropologists working in development, trying to answer this question because it's quite related to decolonization itself to me. So we had a really exciting, intensive discussion it's morning to me, it's afternoon to you, and I want to thank all the participants and all the colleagues who joined organizing this first day of workshop. And Kikin has done the excellent work summarizing the points made by the speakers today. So I would like to wrap up with questions coming back to the starting point of our intention. So the first question is, Does colonization means defying all power domination or specific historical one? And the second one is, are we talking about indigenous order over universal order? Then how do we deal with the pre-existing problem in hierarchy itself? And whether anarchy is a better answer? That is the second question. And then the third one, looking back from this point of time, and with our fashion of political correctness or value, how we addressed the several colonization we talk about in this process. And to me, it's more than a fashion, of course. To me, the agenda talking about colonization is justice. And I eager to know to you in your agenda what matters to you to talk about decolonization. And the next one is, if we may see knowledge or knowledge production as a resource to who has access to it, who sets the boundary of using it, is it a common, and how do we situate this by different purposes? We talk a lot about agenda, but is it possible to shift to a more technical term, talking about purposes of development? And then the last one was sort of came out from my understanding about the discussion happened today, because I consider myself as an outsider, because so I wonder what is the colonial residual? So what has been set up in the experience of colonial process and being retained, consider as fundamental or consider as unchallengeable, consider as something general, common, that embedded in people's awareness or understanding about power. I would like to wrap up with that. And thank you very much for today. I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow.
Thanks, Uttam and Holida also for the sessions, and of course we hope to see you tomorrow as well, so that you can also join us for the discussion tomorrow with Niranta and Pranab. So thanks.
Thank you so much for inviting to this wonderful session. I'll try to join tomorrow if the network permits.
Yes. Yes.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll see everyone tomorrow at 2:30.
It was a nice discussion.
It was a great discussion. Yes, yes. We're happy, looking forward to taking it forward tomorrow.
Same here. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.